right, ladies and gentlemen, let's get this started. Let's do this fast, and let's all have coffee in downtown Jerusalem. David Suissa, president of the LA Jewish Journal and Tribe Media. Dovid Efune, editor of Algemeiner. Charlotte Halle. You know, I never knew. We've been talking for years. I never knew what you did with the E at the end. From Haaretz English edition, Dan Beylsky, head of the news desk of Kol Israel. Tova Lazarov, my colleague at the Jerusalem Post. And let's get started. I'm just going to try and plug in a computer to that screen because I'm going to try and keep you entertained with clever graphics. Watch this. Watch how cool this is. Right? This panel is going to talk about whether we're doing our jobs as the Jewish media. As the media of the Jewish people, a people scattered across very different cultures, a people that thinks many different thoughts and has many different views. There are people here from all kinds of languages, people here from all kinds of religious affiliations. It's a very complicated world that we try to cover. And the question this panel needs to address is, do we report well enough what should be reported about Israel in the Jewish media? Israel is, give or take, this is a fierce debate with a lot of politics in it, half the Jewish people. Does Israeli media report about the rest of the Jewish world, the other half of the Jewish people? I'm going to cut to the chase. It does not. No, so we can all go home. No, that is my opinion. I think that I'm going to start with a 3-minute slideshow with cool online mobile animated slides, so it's going to be entertaining. And then we're going to get into the very boring discussion of the actual topic. The Jewish people is today splintered into very, very different cultures that don't talk to each other almost at all. The people in this room believe that there is a global Jewish conversation because what passes for a global Jewish conversation we keep getting invited to. We keep going to conferences. We are part of, let's say, 50,000 people, Jews from all over the world, who keep meeting each other. But the Jews of the world, the Jews who live in the actual Jewish communities and Israeli cities of the world, don't talk to each other, don't know anything about each other, don't really want to know anything about each other, increasingly don't share any assumptions about what it means to be Jewish or what it demands to be Jewish. And I want to show that. On Sunday, I published in the Times of Israel a 3,400-word essay on this issue. I urge you to read it. It's wonderful. But what was the title? Yeah, everybody here, please feel free to plug your piece. But I'm going to show you that there is a gap, and that this question of, are we as journalists bridging this gap? Do we believe there is a Jewish people, and do we have the tools, and are we acting in order to make sure that it is having a conversation about itself across these cultural boundaries? I'm going to show you how little Jews talk to each other. I'm going to do it the easiest way. I apologize for all the people I'm about to insult. I'm going to do it by showing connections between American Jews and Israeli Jews. This is not because I don't like British Jews or French Jews. It is because American Jews are millions of Jews, and Israeli Jews are millions of Jews. And if they fall apart, the Jewish people has fallen apart. If smaller Jewish communities fade away, there is a terrible tragedy for Jewish history. We lose a Jewish culture, we lose a Jewish history. But we don't lose the Jewish people. And that's not true of the two Jewish communities, sheerly because of numbers. There's nothing special about them. I think there's a lot special about them, but it doesn't have to be anything special about them. And we're going to do that using Facebook, because we're journalists and we're tech savvy. This is the world as Facebook sees it. Can you see it? Let me see if I can expand it. That is the world as Facebook sees it. Those are Facebook connections. That is the logo of the government press office. No, one second. Okay, I didn't do this. It's not my computer. I just brought the graphic. That is the world as Facebook sees it. If you'll notice, there's a vast country missing in northern Asia. Russia is almost not on Facebook. And there's a bright glowing dot where Moscow, you can't even see it from this distance, but you'll have to trust me, there's a bright glowing dot in Moscow. A lot of people are on Facebook in Moscow. The rest of Russia is on other social networks. Look at China. China is missing. Parts of North Africa are missing. This is really Brazil. A lot of Brazil is missing. These are not countries that don't have the internet. These are countries that don't use Facebook. They use other social media. Weibo famously in China, famous to Israelis because now Shimon Peres has an account there. But this is a fascinating map because two of the most significant, most saturated countries when it comes to Facebook in the world, certainly in the Jewish world, are the United States and Israel. And this is a fascinating map because it really tells us something deep about connections on Facebook and what they mean civilizationally. So if you look from the United States to the left, eastward, you see Hawaii. And you see the extent to which Hawaii, socially, culturally, in terms of Facebook friendships, is part of the United States. You can see it here very, very bluntly. You see other things. I don't know how well you can see because I don't know how large that is, but you see India and the Persian Gulf. Millions of Indians are working in the construction boom, the oil money in the Persian Gulf. There are lots and lots of Indian Facebook friends with fellow Indians in the Persian Gulf. India and Britain, Britain and the United States and Canada. There are these deep cultural ties, and they are signaled. If we factor out the fact that some countries aren't on this map because they're not on that particular service, this service tells us a fascinating thing. And Facebook has done something even more interesting. It has opened its APIs to some people who knew how to turn them into interesting graphical interfaces. This is on a site called Facebook Stories, run by Facebook. And these balls are countries that you can select, and they will pop up according to the size of the circle of the other countries, how many Facebook friends they have in those countries. So if I pop up the United Kingdom, all the other countries in the world are resized according to how many Facebook friends they have with the United Kingdom. And the 5 largest are given tags. The 5 largest countries that are friends with the United Kingdom are Ireland, South Africa, Nigeria, Australia, and New Zealand. If I go to Mexico, the 5 largest countries are Spain, Colombia, Venezuela, Argentina, and the United States of America. Everybody understands what's going on here. You go to the United States, and you find out something that I don't think anyone here is shocked by. Americans tend to talk to other people in the world who speak English, and for some reason, Dominicans. I can't explain it. I don't understand it. Somebody's out there who knows something about the Dominican Republic. So my colleague in New York explains to me that this does not in any way mystify New Yorkers. Then I click on Israel. And with this, I'm going to conclude. The 5 largest countries, Facebook defines countries, not me, are Jordan, the Palestinian territories, Egypt. Those are countries where Israeli Arabs have very large numbers of Facebook friends. France and Russia. Why France and Russia? Israel has large immigrant communities from France and Russia, and they have Facebook friends in France and Russia. Who's not here? The United States is not here. Canada is not here. The United Kingdom is not here. Australia is not here. Everyone else is also not here. Mexico is not here. But I didn't expect Mexico to be here. I did expect the United States to beat out Egypt or France. There are, according to Pew last year, And I believe they counted low. I believe every survey of American Jews counts low, but I'm a crazy person. Pew counted 5.3 million American Jews. There are 6 million Israeli Jews. They're easy to count. All the rest of the world might be 1.5 million Jews. And they're not friends on Facebook. They're not friends on Facebook even though 400,000 people, mostly American, majority Americans, have come on birthright over the last 10 years at a cost, I'm guesstimating, of $800 million over 13 years to the Jewish people. They're not friends on Facebook even though shlichim of the various organizations in Israel, mainly the Jewish Agency, but also others, have gone over to those communities. They're not friends on Facebook with Israelis. The Jewish people, the actual Jewish people, not us, and our Facebook connections and our egotistical sharing of our own stories nonstop to each other. Not us, but the actual Jewish people out there are not talking to each other. And so my question is, and the question that this panel is going to try and talk about is, does Israeli media cover the diaspora so that Israelis think about the diaspora? Does the diaspora media cover Israel in ways that allow the Jews of the rest of the world outside of Israel to really connect with Israel culturally, socially? And I will just, one last sentence. I have misplaced the Israel Democracy Institute survey that was published earlier today, a survey that discovered that while 91% of Israelis do wish you all made Aliyah, only 51% of Israelis think we're part of the same people, which is, I think, a fascinating insight about how Israelis are slowly drifting away from diaspora Jews. The way we're going to do this format is everybody who wishes to can address this question, their experiences of trying to cover the diaspora in Israel, of trying to cover Israel in the diaspora, in terms of the panelists, anything that they completely think was stupid about what I said. And then we're going to open it up to the floor. And based on past experience, this gets a little excited. So I think we're just going to start going down. So Dovid, you want to?
Well, the first thing I want to say, just a little story, which is not directly related to the topic, but it's related to something that many people have been discussing throughout the course of this conference. There was a panel I attended earlier about how Jewish media can work economically and how many papers are struggling. So a Jewish publisher who was having a very, very difficult time with his small-town local paper in the United States came to visit his rabbi, and he said to him, "Rabbi, I'm having such a hard time with this paper. I can't get any advertising. We're losing money. It's terrible. I can't afford to pay my bills. What should I do?" So the rabbi says, it's very simple. Take a deck chair and a Bible and go down to the beach and sit down by the waves and the breeze on your deck chair and open up your Bible, and the wind will start to blow this way and that. And when the page finally lands open, read the first thing that you see, and that will give you direction as to what you have to do to save your situation. A couple of months later, the publisher returns to the rabbi, and he's wearing a $5,000 Brioni suit, and he has his wife with him, and she's decked in Cartier jewels. And the rabbi says, "What happened? Tell me what happened." So the publisher says, "Rabbi, I followed your advice to the T. I sat down on my deck chair, I opened up my Bible, and I acted on the first thing I saw." And the rabbi said, "So tell me, what did you see?" So he says, "Well, at the top of the page, it said chapter 11.
There are no coincidences. Explain that for non-Americans.
Chapter 11 is filing bankruptcy for those that are not aware. To the topic at hand, a couple things. First of all, I will say that there is no doubt, and I think everybody here will agree, that there is tremendous importance in global Jewish communities communicating, corresponding, and understanding the interdependence that they do have with one another, especially when it comes to the State of Israel. And we all understand the founding principle of the State of Israel, that every Jew in the world has a place where they can call home. And in our lifetimes, we have seen how important that's been, whether it's Jews in Ethiopia, whether it's Jews from Arab countries, whether it's Jews for Russia. When it really got bad, they had somewhere to go. We see the numbers today in terms of immigration from France, from Ukraine, from Russia. So the global importance for the Jewish community of the State of Israel and vice versa, there's no question, obviously, that the relevance is important, and as members of the Jewish media, to foster that dialogue and that interdependence and understanding is something that's very important. Having said that, I do somewhat disagree with the premise of this whole discussion. As an editor, as many of you know, it's obviously important to select stories that are interesting and relevant to the audience that you're dealing with. For example, even within Israel, you know, a Haredi paper might have different stories and perspective than a secular paper, or a paper in the north might have different things to say than a paper in the south. And in our experience, we actually do find, and we try to monitor, you know, tens of different papers every single day in our day-to-day coverage, that there are certain fields that Israeli media in Hebrew are very, very, very interested in. And there are certain fields that English language media, Jewish media and otherwise, in the United States are also very, very interested in. And they usually have something to do with what the direct relevance is of that particular story. So, for example, in the US, you know, there were big Israeli stories about, you know, the Abu Lafia crime family up north. Or there's a story now about a woman, 40-year-old woman in Eilat who was arrested for having sexual relations with minors. Huge stories in Israel, all over the press. Not a peep in the English media, and it's understandable, and I don't think it should be any different because those stories are simply not relevant to audiences around the world. The Israeli media, on the other hand, is very, very interested in anti-Semitism around the world. They're interested in what's happening in Ukraine, and we've covered that extensively. They're interested in what's happening in France, etc. So the truth is, I feel that to the extent that it's relevant, there is a tremendous amount of overlap in that regard, and the Israeli media covers what it thinks is relevant to its audience, and the Jewish media in the United States covers what it thinks is relevant to its audience. I can say our coverage of the captured Israeli teens was wall-to-wall, almost as extensive as it was here in Israel, and I believe the same is for many of the Jewish newspapers in the United States and around the world. The last thing that I want to say very briefly is that I think it is important that this discussion is understood within the context of how the movement of information is evolving in today's world. And this is something which younger people especially will notice, how things are rapidly changing in the media environment, and Haviv, your presentation displayed that quite extensively and accurately. And that is what we're seeing is the democratization of information. So as editors, we all like to think of ourselves as dictators of our little fiefdoms. You know, we decide what's important for people to know and what's not important for people to know. And even the premise of this discussion, editors should be writing more about this, it should be writing more about that, and obviously that will change the dialogue and discourse, and people will start thinking about it differently and acting differently. But the truth is, the way that media is evolving today is completely differently. It's becoming more and more dependent on the community to share and to vote, essentially, on what is important for them to know and what is not important for them to know. There's been a lot of discussion here and in general in the media environment about what they call the death of print. But what we're seeing now in the younger generation especially is what we call the death of actual websites as a destination, in the sense that it used to be people would turn on their computer and visit NewYorkTimes.com or Jewish Journal or Haaretz or Algemeiner.com in the morning and see whatever was going on and what the news was, and that was how they received their information. Today, those that are in the under 30 demographic, and our readers are 61.5% are under the age of 34, primarily get their information through news feeds, through aggregators, through social media, through search engines, etc. So what happens is, the New York Times' concept of all the news that's fit to print has been proven a lie, because all the news that's fit to print is different for every individual person. And today, everybody has the tools to be able to define that for themselves. So really the question becomes, back to the point that I was making before, for any editor that's addressing this issue, the question is what is interesting and what is relevant and what has an impact on their readers and their audience, and that remains our responsibility, to keep our finger as close to the pulse as possible, to understand what is important for our communities to know, and what needs to be highlighted and what is important and interesting to them, and then do our best to convey that and bring that across. And I think for the most part, in terms of this gap between Israel and the United States, it seems to be going okay.
That's okay. It's all right. As President-elect Rivlin said, it's okay to be wrong. You have a right to. Charlotte.
Well, I wouldn't say you are wrong, but I'd certainly say that you're pessimistic, and I have a much more optimistic view of Israel and the diaspora's understanding of each other and engagement with each other. Haaretz, of course, is dancing at both weddings. We have a Hebrew edition, almost 100 years old, and since 1997, we have had an English edition, which has allowed aspects of Israeli reality in an unmitigated form to be presented for diaspora readers. Now, in Israel, there is a very different conversation to the debates and issues that come up in the diaspora, even though we do have this intimate connection. Because, of course, in Israel, we're the majority. We have a nation state, all the trappings of a nation state. And this, I believe, gives us the ability not to try and calculate what the effect of reporting on certain issues, what the impact's going to be. We don't have to sit down and think about, if we write this, is it good for the Jews? Is it not good for the Jews? Zionism and the thriving success of Israel's democracy liberates us from having to engage in what the impact of what we publish will be while we're debating. We're free here to publicly and vivaciously debate with each other. It allows us to be journalists and Israeli journalists in the fullest sense as we record and discern events. And Haaretz offers this unvarnished version of what's happening here, not only about the occupation, a central issue, but also about the treatment of foreign workers, about the economy, about social welfare, about film festivals. It's an honest journalism, I believe, and that's what I think we're aspiring for, which doesn't whitewash the problems, doesn't hush up debates. And I think that Haaretz's take on Israel's challenges makes these issues more accessible to diaspora Jews outside of Israel. That it's not patronizing to diaspora Jews. Now, obviously, we're not the only ones doing this, and increasingly, media organizations inside Israel are creating content in English and in many other languages, telling Israel's story and portraying the debates inside this country. There are organizations which are applauding this effort, like B'nai Brit, who on Sunday have got their annual awards ceremony, which everyone here is invited to. Alan Schneider asked me to mention. It's an event in Hebrew, which is specifically to applaud journalists who engage in Israel diaspora coverage and try and deepen debate. This year, Haaretz's Judy Maltz is being awarded a prize, along with journalists from various other media. And this is something which I see as thriving and growing. Now, the twist in the story for us at the English edition of Haaretz is that when we were established back in 1997, we prided ourselves on being like a window to a window into the Israeli conversation. I suppose it was kind of like press your nose against the glass, and you don't have to read Hebrew to find out what Israelis are debating over their Friday night table. Come and listen. But as we've evolved at the newspaper, and we're less focused on our print edition here and more focused on our international readership outside of this country, we've expanded our coverage considerably to cover lots of issues in the Jewish world, and specifically to debate the diaspora, Israel, tensions, discussions, which all of us here are deeply engaged in. Now, this is material that's mainly been created in English for our international readers, but interestingly, our Hebrew edition is now taking a fair amount of that content and publishing it in Hebrew. I'll give you some of the stories which have been translated from our English writers, some of them here, Dana Harmon, Alison Kaplan-Summer. I'm sure you're familiar with other names, Chemi Shalev and Bradley Burst and Anshel Pfeffer. Judy, I mentioned Judy, but their content that's been delivered in Hebrew and gets well read by our Israeli readers, and of course we can judge that now with the help of Google Analytics. In the last year, we've written about birthright, about immigration from the Ukraine and France, Aliyah from Greece, from Peru, lots of debate about women of the wall, which is an issue which has made its way into the Hebrew media, even though we've been writing about it for years in English. Different trends, religious trends, like about the growth in numbers at midnight, Shlichot prayers and Tikkun Leil Shavuot. Trends like American Jews coming to do internships in Israel, kind of the new kibbutz volunteerism. Obviously Hollywood, they like our Hollywood stories. Israeli students, issues for them abroad. Diaspora Jews, issues here. And even a couple of weeks ago, we translated from English into Hebrew Rabbi Eric Yoffe's opinion piece, where he challenged the president-elect, President Rivlin, on his attitude towards Reform Judaism, which again is been a very, very hot topic for readers on haaretz.com, and again made its way into the Hebrew. Of course, most readers are interested in themselves, but if our starting point is that this intimate connection exists, then for Israelis reading about the diaspora and for the diaspora Jews reading about Israel, if this intimacy exists, then that to and fro is in some ways reading about ourselves, which is why I'm much more optimistic than the premise of this panel. Thanks.
Okay. Hi, I would like to be not optimistic, not pessimistic, but realistic. And I want to say, at least from the standpoint of the radio, I want to say that I'm a senior news editor at the Israeli National Radio for the past 26 years. I have been the chief news editor at several Israeli dailies, from Maariv, Hadashot, Haaretz, you name it. So I can tell you that in percentage, the coverage of the diaspora in Israeli media is less than 5%, and I am very generous in saying less than 5% instead of less than 1%. It's not that it doesn't interest us. That's not the case. And I can tell you, I've been an emissary of the Jewish Agency in Chicago. I have been Shaliach, Aliyah Shaliach. So, and even after coming back, the fact is that we don't have enough information from the Jewish communities around the world. We don't have the awareness. As a news editor, I'm looking at 5 minutes broadcasting that I have, and I have so many stories that diaspora stories don't really get into the media news that I really edit, and not that others do, and I'm more aware of Jewish communities around the world. That's one thing. The other thing is that I think that we lack in our connections. There is not enough news agencies for Jewish stories from around the world. The Israeli National Radio, for instance, we don't have enough reporters around the world, so we can't get the stories from the different places. So it's not that we don't want to put them in, we don't have them. So if something bad happens, if a Jew is murdered or attacked, that is covered as if this specific person was attacked in Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, or Afula. But all the other stories we don't really hear about. We don't see them, we don't have them in our scope. I can tell you that I have been chairman of Partnership 2000 of for Saba, which the place that I live in Columbus, Ohio. And we have so many joint projects together, and I am trying to bring stories about this partnership into the local media in Kfar Saba. Almost impossible. It doesn't interest them. It is a dead thing. It is amazing how many Israeli publications are not interested in what is happening around the globe, in the Jewish globe, which is problematic. I think that it is not the connection between Israeli journalists and Jewish journalists around the world is not strong enough, and we should be much more connected through Facebook, something that we're not. I can say I have around 6,000 friends, and I have around 5 or 6 friends in Chicago, which is quite amazing for a person that has been serving this community for 3 years. So something really, there is a gap, and we need to bridge it. We need to do something about it. I've been in Chicago for about 18 months until people in the community knew that I'm a journalist. And there was one of the people from the Jewish Federation came to Israel, and they said, well, who is your shaliach? And they said, well, Dan Beylsky. So, oh, he's well-known in Israel. What do you mean well-known? We have a rating, the radio in our news, we have a rating between 25 to 35% on every newscast, which is quite amazing. And still, it didn't make a difference when I was there, and this is something that we have to work on. We have to work on that through Facebook. We have to work on that through panels like we have today, through conferences, because I think it is important for you to have Israeli journalists in your publications, and for us to get information from the places around the world so we know what is happening, and then we can have different radio shows or pages or columns or whatever to really cover what is happening in the Jewish communities around the world. It's not that it doesn't interest us. I think that it is because we are not aware, and we're not available. The availability of the information is not enough. And to be honest, when I'm editing the news, I'm working with my reporters. I'm working with a news agency, which is Associated Press, and Reuters, the British one, and AFP, the French, and that's it. And those news agencies don't give a damn about Jewish life. So you don't get the stories, and we need to be aware of that. So the fact that we don't know what is happening, we don't cover it. If we don't cover it, the connection really fades away. And that is the major aspect that we have to tackle. I think that this is something that we have to work on, and there are a lot of ways to do it through social media, because I think that is our future. That is the way that we should do something about it. We are not doing enough. I hope that we'll do something in the future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dan, I dare say this, we just heard what may be the essence of this conference, which is that there's been feedback from the audience already, and people are saying, what about services like JTA, which the Times of Israel subscribes to, and they do have reporters all over the place. Not yet.
I will tell you something about JTA. The thing is that most of my news editors, the senior one, don't know about it.
Right.
They're not aware of it.
Right.
So we need some PR to make the information available to news editors. I can tell you that Israeli news editors don't know what the hell you're talking about. I am aware of it because I was outside of Israel. Other people are not. And when I come to my bosses and I'm saying we need to subscribe, they're laughing at me. And I think that we need to subscribe on Haaretz and on Sunday Times and things like that, and they're not doing it. So they're saying you have your news agencies, go figure out how you come out of it. It's very difficult. I think that we need to join hands and do something about the familiarity and the knowledge about the Jewish world, because if we do that, you will see a totally different coverage of the Jewish community around the globe.
Tova Lazaroff at my journalistic alma mater.
Yes, hi.
How are you?
My name is Tova Lazaroff, and I'm the Deputy Managing Editor of the Jerusalem Post. I'm originally from Boston, which will be
Speaking to the microphone.
Oh, sorry. Is this better? Yeah, okay. I'm originally from Boston. I came to Israel in 2000, and believe it or not, nobody knows this or remembers this, but Stephen Greer. When I started at the Jerusalem Post, I started as the Diaspora Affairs correspondent. And one of the first things that absolutely shocked me when I came, because I'm American and I think the whole world revolves around America, and even better if it revolves around Boston, was how few Americans had actually made Aliyah to Israel. I mean, I knew so many people who had come to Israel, lots of English in Israel. It just seemed to me that must be like half the country must have come from America. And in fact, it hadn't. Americans represent, as do immigrants from English-speaking countries, some of the smaller immigrant groups. One of the biggest immigrant groups, by the way, is Russia, which gets me right back to those Facebook graphs about, are we talking, is Israel talking to the world? Well, the first most critical thing about a conversation is language. And the language here, albeit, people who don't know anything about Israel and America think we speak English here, but the language that's here, in spite of this conference, is actually Hebrew. If you're going to talk on Facebook, right, you're going to talk in a language that you know. So what are some of the biggest common languages? Well, Russia. Russia was on that graph, right, because there's been, at least in the history of the State of Israel, probably 2 million people that have immigrated to Israel from Russia and from the former Soviet Union, and they all know Russian and they know Russia, so they can talk. If you want to talk about Arabic, then you have all the Israeli Arabs, and then after that you have the Jews who came. A lot of Jews who came from Israeli Arab lands who now are on Facebook and can talk in Arabic, right? So when you see that graph, you see sort of some of the problems in the conversation, which is language, but I don't know that it's so reflective of the absence, if you will, of a conversation. So for example, if I were to just take, where you said the United States, if I were to do that, say, for the state of Massachusetts, right, I might find that one of the places that people in Massachusetts talk to on Facebook is Ireland, because the Irish make up a very huge demographic in Massachusetts. So in terms of proving whether or not we talk to each other, I don't know if those graphs really do it. What I do know, right, is that if we talk about whether or not, what was my question? Why doesn't the Israeli press cover the diaspora, right? So I think the Israeli press, as you said, does cover the diaspora. It covers the diaspora on questions that are relevant to it. For example, existential threats. If an al-Qaeda terrorist blew up anything Jewish in America, a synagogue, a school, any visible Jewish symbol, everybody would cover it, including, I imagine, your radio station. If a new study came out tomorrow that said that American Jews had lost all political power in America, right, and they were going to be a non-factor in the next election, every Israeli newspaper would have it, and you're right. Anything that talks about us, right? Because at the end of the day, all news is local. It's what do we care about, right? So when Israelis look out at the world and they evaluate what foreign news they want to cover, when they want to cover news about America or news about the diaspora, that's why anti-Semitism comes up, right? You know, if the shooting in Belgium, all of a sudden we all wanted to talk about Belgium, which really is never a big focus of anybody's storyline in any Jewish newspaper, including, I would imagine, right, the Jerusalem Post. The problem is how, once you go beyond, celebrities, sorry, I forgot about that. You know, if somebody's Jewish wins an Oscar, if they win a gold medal, we like to remember that suddenly we are all one people and they are part of us, right? We can claim them. They're Jewish. Spielberg, definitely Jewish. But the thing is this. So we can do global threats, but how do we link, right? How do we link things that are about everyday life? Right? How do we create a common conversation? So that's where Israel becomes an easy common denominator. You're all here, I'm assuming from all different countries, because Israel is a common denominator to the Jewish people, right? So the Jerusalem Post, for example, has 50% of its readership online comes from the United States. Why? Because Israel is a common denominator to the Jewish people. But what happens as a people, right, when as we move already into the 21st century and we're over a century out of the shtetl, and when you move outside of Israel and you start to talk about what are the common languages that we have, what is the common language between Israel and the diaspora, is really the same question about what is the common language, say, between San Francisco and New York. So you said, for example, when you spoke, sorry, I'm looking at you, knowing, right, Fishkoff, I know exactly, but nobody else knows I'm looking at you, but I was looking at you as I was speaking, because I was thinking about what you said about how Jews in your community, when they did something Jewish, they invested. They built the Opera House, right? Okay, well, if that Opera House burnt down, that would be a big story for your newspaper, right? You would cover it, you would do a whole history of it, you would talk about the impact of the opera as the Jewish contribution to San Francisco that is now gone, okay? But I don't know in the Jerusalem Post if I would cover it, you wouldn't cover it, but I don't know if the Jewish Week in New York would cover it, right? So right now in the Jewish Week in New York, there's a big story, I think, about an obstetrician or something, or there was an obstetrician who murdered his wife, right? And there's also something with the school board in the New York area that seems to be a very big deal. But, the question becomes, how do you make local Jewish life around the globe relevant? And is that something that a newspaper can do? Maybe the answer is Facebook, social media, Twitter. Maybe the conversation has to get started somewhere else, or maybe the way to do it is for newspapers to create conversational forums right? Rather than, so if you're talking about lack of resources, right? If you, in areas where you have, you know, a common language, and Israel actually serves well, and very little resources, maybe the idea is just for newspapers to be more of a community board and have common conversations, right? Like a chat, say, between Israelis or Americans or Belgian Jews and, you know, Jews in Israel, or any, and in fact, any now because of French, right? You would look for places with common language. I think there actually, in spite of the graph, I think there is a need to build up the conversation. I'm just not sure that local newspapers, and at the end of the day, we're all local newspapers, right? In terms of a news story, I'm not sure if that's the place that we should be looking to build the conversation, or if the absence of those stories means that there is an absence of a conversation.
David, very interested to hear what you have to say about these issues. At the LA Jewish Journal, you have Shmuel Rosner writing analysis of Israeli politics that a lot of the political writers in Israel make a point of reading, which is very strange in this landscape, to be part of a conversation on the other side. Mm-hmm. So, please.
First of all, I have ADD, so I'm going to speak very quickly in sound bites, and I'm from LA. There's really two areas here, is how do you cover Israel for the diaspora, and how do you cover the diaspora for Israel? So I'll just want to make a couple of remarks in each area. So we'll start with, how do you cover the diaspora for Israel, right? There's a tremendous amount of amazing content out there, and a lot of it needs to be translated into Hebrew, because a lot of it is a language issue that Israelis like to read in Hebrew more than they like to read in English. And we need to figure out some way. I was speaking to Jane the other day and Shmuel and stuff, and some kind of way of figuring out a way of translating this amazing content that we cover in the diaspora for Israel. And in that spirit, I want to just sort of make a pitch for broccoli rather than ice cream. But I don't mean any kind of broccoli. You know, the ice cream is, you know, Jews in trouble, and that's just sort of what people want. And the only issue I will take with the panel is that, you know, we can't just let the people lead the way. That's not what our job is about. It can't just be, my kids want to eat ice cream and chocolate all day long. That's not what I'm going to give them. And if we find out in focus groups that the readers, you know, what they're most interested in is Jews in trouble, in some synagogue in Los Angeles gets attacked, and then that will get Israelis to be interested in content from LA. I think we need to be a little bolder than that. And there's tremendous amount of what I call texture, the stories of Sephardic Jewry in Los Angeles, the story of Persian Jewry in Los Angeles, stuff that may not test well in focus groups, but that really can give a sense of the American Jewish condition. For example, you know, there would seem to be a little shock when you had the Women of the Wall thing that happened here in Israel. And maybe one of the reasons is because, you know, we didn't do a good enough job of taking all the content that we have in America and sending it to Israel. Content that would have sort of established the idea that Reform Jewry and conservative Jewry and all the sort of the liberal, progressive view of Judaism in America is a very, very big deal. So maybe that's something that needs to be conveyed more. And then finally, the point I want to make on that one section is that the diaspora is a lot more than America, you know. And I think, you know, if there's something that's interesting in the local community in Argentina, I think that should also come to Israel. And whether it's Poland or Romania, one of the great things about the Jewish people is we have this commonality. And we're like one large family, and the more we can convey from communities all around the world, Jewish communities, the better off we'll be. So that's the first area. The second area in terms of how do we cover Israel for the diaspora, and you were mentioning Shmuel Rosner. Well, look, the ice cream broccoli point is the same, but I want you to know, when I say broccoli, I don't just mean cold broccoli. I mean my mother's broccoli. with spices and cumin and stir-fry, and it tastes really good. But it's also good for you. So that's the kind of content we've been speaking about. Do we cover or do we not cover? I think the better question is, how do we cover? So again, the issue of Israel, the ice cream is the fighting and the infighting and the conflict. There's two kinds of Jews. I call it the Diaspora junkies and then the conflict junkies. The Diaspora junkies, they just want to hear stories about how we can make people walk, from their crippled, or how we're now curing Alzheimer, and it's wonderful. It's Startup Nation, it's great. And then the conflict junkies are only interested in how the Haredim are destroying Israel, and give me more. Give me more of that kind of ice cream. But we have learned, really, through the journal, that there's so much more about Israel than Hasbara and conflict. It's funny, one of my favorite all-time reporters is a non-Jewish woman who knew nothing about Israel. She was never in Israel. She knows hardly anything about Judaism. It turns out she was a great writer at the LA Weekly. She fell in love with this guy who happened to live in Tel Aviv. And my beloved partner, Rob Eshman, knew her, and we hired her. She has written my favorite stuff to read about Israel. She doesn't know anything, so all she knows is how to write and how to be really curious. So she did this story on the underground city of the bus station in Tel Aviv. And she covered the refugee crisis with such depth. And she went when, during the demonstrations for the three kidnaps, she went there herself. She lives in Tel Aviv. There was a big snowstorm in Jerusalem. She went there. She ended up risking her life. It's an amazing story. So the point I'm making about the coverage of Israel is you need somebody here in Israel. It took me 5 hours to convince Shmuel Rosner to join the Jewish Journal 2-3 years ago as a kafit. Maybe 3 hours. I'm Sephardic. I exaggerate. All right. So, but we have a local person, Shmuel, and he's fantastic, and he gives us content pretty much every day. And we're able to provide to our readers analysis that comes from Israel. And I think too often, we just gloss over the real Israeli stuff. Yesterday, with Gary Rosenblatt and some others, read this amazing day on the spiritual revival movement of Israel. And I got to tell you, it's not being covered. It's not being covered in America, not enough, I don't think. And it's something, when I go back to LA, I'm going to say, we need to cover this, because it's a fascinating movement. It's sort of pluralism with an Israeli accent. And it's not pluralism with an American accent. And there's a fascinating story there. But it's not ice cream. It's not another bomb falling, and it's not a sort of one of those Haredi destroying Israel story that people love, or the woman on the wall demonstrating and stuff like that. It's a story of texture. And I think texture brings people together. We understand, we're not people of the book. We're the people of the stories. I often say, thank God I don't work for the Buddhist Journal. I'd have one column a year. But I work for the Jewish Journal. We're the people with the biggest mouth in history. So we have content. And I think it's a question of figuring out how to take this content, how to select the content, and serve it over like my mother's broccoli.
Thank you very much. I just, one sentence, and then we'll go to questions. I want to second something that David said. Our failure to cover each other as much as we should and could is a market failure, because the audience is there. The audience is there. The study I mentioned 10 minutes ago, or what is it already? Time flies. 81% of Israeli Jews are interested to know more about what's happening with Jews in the diaspora. So they say in a study conducted for this conference. So you guys have information. There are markets out there that want to consume this information, and arguably that's not happening. So maybe there are questions here where there are actual market failures, and it's not just a question of us as journalists trying to sort of shove material that an audience doesn't want at them. Let's open it up to questions.
Just a second, I wanted to say one thing. I think that there are a lot of small publications around the world that can't really pay so much for reporters in Israel. But I think that there are a lot of Israeli journalists that would like to write, even for free, only to give an insight about Israel. And I think that if we would do things like that, then you would have the vice versa connection, and then you would have a much better coverage.
Great. Right over there, please. But use the microphone, be loud, be quick, and please ask
I'm
a
Maxine
question.
Dover, and I have had the lovely experience of too much writing for free, as some of your panel members will know. Who is my landlord going to thank when I write for free? This is disrespectful to every one of the writers in this room, every one of the photographers in this room. If the publisher can't publish, then perhaps we should be combining some of our media or getting out the advertising in a way that will allow publishers, not allow, but enable publishers to pay their damn writers. It's enough of free. This is not an ego trip. This is work. This is hard work. And if we craft a piece of material, or if I sit and edit pictures until 4 o'clock in the morning, I don't want to have somebody who's a lawyer who wants a little bit of ego trip write for free. It's not fair to those of us who consider this our work.
I'm not talking about people from the States. I'm talking about Israelis that are
I'm talking about anyone who is willing to give content. And what about the Israeli writers? Why are they different? Tell me, why is there a tent city? Because there are creative people who can't make a living.
I just want to say, I'm starting to feel at home. I was just waiting for it.
This just got Jewish. All right.
Okay.
Obviously, people should be paid for their work. Our solution is to open a Chinese edition. So that's how we're planning on paying for everything. Please.
I want to address the subject of topics and say that there's much more to Jewish life than just the major news stories. And I did a story for the Greater Journal of Los Angeles, which was based in Wellington in New Zealand. It was a very, very good human interest story. And I want to know what happens to them. I also want to know what happens to the young journalists on all of your news desks. Because I know that in Scotland on a Sunday, our job was to go through all the local newspapers throughout the country and try and find stories. But it doesn't appear to me that you guys do that, because most of our websites are known to you, but you're obviously not looking at them. Thank you.
Obviously, you meant everyone on this panel except me, so we can move on. Does anyone want to take that on the panel?
I didn't understand the question.
Please, in the back. Whichever one of you.
I'm from Denmark. I think one of the problems with changing stories is your inaccessibility. When we have some Jewish interesting stories breaking, I've been looking at your websites, I've been looking at your colophons, but not found any telephone number or any mail directly to any editor. Like
310-388.
Okay, give it to me afterwards. A couple of months ago, our Minister of Agriculture in Denmark decided to stop Schriete, just like that. That was a good story. An even better story was that after the chairman of the Jewish community had contacted the Prime Minister and asked her to stop the Minister of Agriculture, he decided to meet with the Jewish community and also with the Muslims. That was another good story. But I would very much have liked to correspond it, but it didn't have anywhere to go.
Those, I think, are the most important statements, because that's something that we can solve in the next 20 minutes, and unlike maybe some of the other issues we're raising. Anybody want to take that on the panel? Or?
I think that maybe we should open many groups on Facebook with several or a lot of Jewish publications. From there, you can publish there, and it will, whoever is interested will publish in their own country. So there needs to be a place, a resource, that will be a place for you to publish your stories and then to make them available for other publications.
And I got to tell you, if anybody here has any interesting stories about the Jewish community, wherever you live, just send them to me.
Or me, whatever.
Or me. We are interested in those stories. Even though we might do a focus group in LA Jews and find out that they're not interested, we're going to publish it anyways, because we think it's important.
Can you repeat your email?
Sorry?
Can you repeat your email, please?
Oh, David S., jewishjournal.com.
Guys, let's keep the conversation. Everyone can tackle David immediately after. Uriel.
I would certainly like
please.
to have published that story about Shechita. And we've written about Shechita and lots of European legislation. And my email, charlotte@Haaretz, is on the website. Bring it on. I mean, I'm obsessed with Danish Parliament anyway, because I'm watching Borgen, the TV show, which is fantastic. So to combine that and key Jewish issues, which of course don't just affect Danish Jews, but resonate around the Jewish world, is I think grippingly interesting and keen for more.
And by the way, there's another thing. It's not just Jews. You know, the Middle East itself, 400 million people in the greater Middle East. It's a fascinating world. And in the past few years, we've been fortunate enough to have a relationship with the Media Line. So we're able to have boots on the ground in Syria, in Egypt, and in a lot of places, so we can give that in-depth coverage. Because one of the things about our readers is they're not interested just in Jews. They're interested in understanding the world.
I'm just going to second what some of the panelists have said. I can say from our experience, some of the biggest stories that we have published this year have originated in other publications, sometimes in other languages. So what both of you are saying, I think, is fundamental. You've just got to find a way to get those channels of communications open, and I think everybody here is going to be prepared to share whatever contact information is necessary. Big stories happen everywhere. And it's important to have that network to make sure that when it does happen, it's able to get the audience that it needs to get.
Hi, Uri Heilman from JTA. I'm trying to think of a way to frame this that doesn't sound too self-serving, so forgive me.
I don't think anyone here had that problem except you, so just go ahead.
I think one of the challenges of Jewish newspapers is speaking simultaneously to their own audience and to an audience overseas. So, Dan, you mentioned the difficulty of convincing your editors to sign on to JTA or to be aware of other news services and other news outlets. I think one of the challenges is that the newspaper in Memphis, Tennessee, writes primarily for the Jews of Memphis, Tennessee, and the newspaper in Boston writes primarily for the Jews in Boston. But there are a few newspapers that don't do that, and JTA is one of those news outlets. We believe that there is great interest in Jewish communities all over the world to read about other Jewish communities. And in fact, we've seen it both in our Google Analytics and in our growth of our clients. Here in Israel alone, we've picked up 2 new clients, Haaretz and Times of Israel, in the last 3 years. We think there's interest. I think, Tova, you really hit upon one of the key points of the language barrier. JTA used to be translated into Russian and to Spanish. Today we're only in English. We are picked up by Haaretz, and I think occasionally our pieces are translated into Hebrew. But we believe that there is a market, and we've seen this, a market for Jews in Israel to read about Jews in Florida, Jews in Philadelphia to read about Jews in Winnipeg. It's just, you have to write the story in a particular way so that it's not just for the Jews of Winnipeg. Or not just for the Jews of Florida. And because newspapers are very local focused, and I think correctly so, you can't necessarily take a piece from the Jewish paper in a particular city and have that be comprehensible to a wide readership. And I think that as Haaretz has gone into the U.S. market and other papers have looked abroad, I think they've picked up on this, that when you're writing for an audience that's not at home, it's a bit different. So I think that's an important point.
Thank you. All the way in the back corner. And then we will have time for just one more question, but, all our emails are available.
Hi, I'm Michelle Chabin. I write for the New York Jewish Week and USA Today and the National Catholic Register and Religion News Service, among others.
In the afternoon.
I can say that 4 or 5 years ago, that Jewish journalism was perhaps 80% of my income. And today, it's 30% of my income, perhaps, 40%. I think if Jewish newspapers want original Jewish content, they have to prioritize for it. There are so many stories that I sell to USA Today or the Catholic Register that Jewish newspapers are not taking because, according to the editors, we don't have a budget. And then people call me with great, great stories, and I say, I'm sorry, it's not my week. And sometimes I can pitch it anyway to a certain newspaper. But there's so many articles that I don't publish in the Jewish papers because of that. And also, if you're being paid, like I am, $300 or $200 a story, you go with the paper that pays more. You have to. As for the Israeli newspapers that don't want to know anything about the diaspora or don't cover the diaspora very much, I think it's a bunch of lo akhpatiyut, which means in Hebrew, they don't give a damn. USA Today has a world page in its printed edition, okay, one world page. But on the website, it has a huge amount of stories on the world page. And I think that if Israeli newspapers give a damn, they will have a diaspora page, if not in the actual newspaper, then on the website. And I personally am not seeing that. I know that Haaretz got rid of its Anglophile, which I know was meant for really a local readership, but the newspaper is tinier and tinier. But if it's something is on the website, I don't understand why you cannot have 6 or 7 stories, whether it be JTA or the New York Jewish Week, which is a fantastic newspaper, or the LA Jewish Journal, where I also work sometimes. The content is there. If you want to pay someone to translate, then do it. If you don't want to, it means you don't want to.
If I can just make one quick rebuttal, 30 seconds. I believe journalism is the most important institution in the Jewish community. And if we're able, my dream, I'm being idealistic for a minute, if we can get the philanthropists some of that money to be invested in Jewish journalism as a legitimate, critical Jewish institution, then I think we'll be able to afford more people like Shmuel Rosner and so forth, which is what we're trying to do with Jewish Journal, really to sort of, create this paradigm shift of not looking at it as just, a newspaper, but really a genuine Jewish institution for Jewish continuity, for Jewish unity, for Jewish curiosity, and all the good things that the Federation and other groups like to do. I think we do that role as good or better than anyone. And all the while staying independent. I think that's my dream.
I just want to say just one more thing. And if you can't pay us very much, at least invite us to your communities to speak. At least let us sell our books in your communities. Consult with us. Make us your experts. If you're having anything on the web, if you're having a Q&A, at least promote us, promote our brand, because we are financially dying here. And if you want original content, there are not many of us, unless they have people who have a trust fund or a very, very rich spouse who will be able to continue to deliver what you want and what I think the Jewish community needs.
Let me. First, we should have a round of clapping for more money. I agree. But the second, just one quick comment on what you said about Israeli journalism. There is, and then we'll take one last question, and then we have to break. There is about 5 years ago, I was standing outside the General Assembly of the Jewish Federations of North America that was taking place in Jerusalem, as it does every 5 years. And I stood next to a few diaspora reporters at Hebrew language Israeli papers, nobody on this panel, and they were complaining. And they were complaining that at this conference of, I don't know, you're all much more aware than Israelis, of fundraisers, a conference of professional fundraisers whose job is to raise money and then distribute it. Every panel was about money. Every panel. And these two reporters were saying, geez, these American Jews, they come to Israel to sit around and talk about money all day. They didn't know. They didn't know. It's like going to the biennial of the Reform Rabbinate and complaining that every damn panel is about the Reformim. So this is a market failure in the sense that Israeli media, and this does not include the people on this panel. Unfortunately, the people on this panel are not running the entirety of Israeli media, just are too ignorant to understand the story and to understand the cool, sexy, interesting stories, which there are endless, even for Israelis, and Israelis want that information, we know from polls. Let me take one last question, and then obviously we can all yell at each other.
Gail Winston from Israel, finally, and formerly from Chicago. To answer some of the technical problems, you have tremendous resources technically, but you're not using them. What you need to do that will help, in part, is to fix the language problem. If anyone here is Hebraically challenged, as I still am, we must survive in a Hebrew world, but we can also need the English translation. The Google translations that you get when you press translate are terrible. There has to be an improved method of translating both languages, all the languages that are possible to reach a translator for. Get a decent translation and you'll solve, at least be optimistic, 15, 20% of the problems in terms of language. Language is the key to what we do. And then the second thing is, we have this great list that I received, and I think the rest of you will, that has everyone's email address, names first, email address, phone numbers, papers, and so on. That needs to be expanded. That needs to be kept up to date. That needs to be done technically in a way that people who are very young and very good with their fingers can do. So those are my two suggestions. Translate and give us the names and the numbers and the connections, please.
That concludes, please don't get up, that concludes this panel. I've just been asked, please come and speak, yeah. Because we might have a solution to some of this.
שלום, תודה. אני מדבר קצת עברית, אני מבין טוב מאוד עברית, אבל אני מדבר בספרדית. והיא מתרגם. ella va a traducir. Si quieres explicar lo que dije.
Okay. He's going to speak in Spanish and I will be translating in English.
Primero quiero agradecer, creo que en nombre de todos los que estamos hoy aquí, por el gran esfuerzo que han hecho que estemos hoy todos reunidos.
He wants to thank everyone for the effort to get all these Jewish journalists here.
Casi naturalmente surgía la pregunta, ¿cómo hacemos para juntarnos todos los que estuvimos en este encuentro?
We were all wondering how we can get together. Okay. We were all wondering how we can keep in touch with all this group because it's really a valuable group.
Y la respuesta sin duda estaba muy cerca de todos nosotros.
And the answer was really close from all of us.
Así que a la noche, tarde, creé o abrí un grupo en Facebook.
So last night I created a Facebook group.
Que la idea es que sea cerrado para todos aquellos que participamos en este encuentro.
So the idea is have this close group in Facebook for all the participants of this summit.
Y el grupo se llama
And the name group is
Jewish Media Group.
Jewish Media Group.
Okay. De esa manera uno puede entrar.
By that name you can find it.
Yo lo que voy a hacer ahora es simplemente hacer la propuesta de lo que creo que debe ocurrir en ese grupo.
Now he's going to make the proposal of what that's supposed to be in that group.
Va a ser la primera vez que todos vamos a poder estar en una gran red.
It's going to be the first time that all of us can be in one big red.
Y con el tiempo, la idea es que cada uno, desde su lugar de origen, desde su país,
and the idea is each one of you from your country
pueda subir un contenido, una nota mensual.
Could upload at least one news in the month.
Si lo hacemos permanentemente y todos juntos, va a ser un lío.
Not more than one because it's going to be messy.
Okay. Por eso la idea es comenzar lentamente a loguearse y a participar, como también si algún día ocurre algo en algún país. Yo soy de la Argentina. En la Argentina, dentro de muy pocos días, se cumplen 20 años de un importante atentado.
The idea is if sometimes something important happened in your country, you can communicate it. Actually, he's from Argentina, and now is the anniversary of AMIA.
Y si mañana ocurre, Dios no quiera, algo en algún lado, vamos a estar todos juntos para pedirnos ayuda en un gran clearing.
And if something bad happened, not that we want to happen, we can be together and
en un gran grupo.
In a big group to support each other.
Ok, esto es todo. Jewish Media Group. Pido que todos se ingresen y que esto crezca y que el año que viene, si Dios quiere, podamos volver a encontrarnos aquí todos juntos. Muchas gracias a todos.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Okay.
No, I think they should change it to Free Jewish Media Group.
At the very least, you've got sources in other countries. That's the very least. People to interview. Don't upload your articles.
Okay, please don't stand up. We would like to conclude our 4 intensive days and to say goodbye. I think that the journalist from Argentina is an example that we succeed, and we would like to do a follow-up, and it won't be just one conference and then everybody goes home. We will have a continuity during the year, and as we said, we have this list of the 140 journalists that participate. We will send you on the website all the details, and also my personal view after the last brilliant panel that we should remember that there is, apart from Israelis and American Jews, some other journalists around Europe and around other countries, and we need to find the balance that not the Israeli and not the Americans will control most of the panels. This is just my remarks. I would like to thank everybody, first of all to participate. Secondly, the 4 ministers that without them there wasn't be a Jewish Media Summit. Minister of Tourism, Minister of Diaspora, Minister of Foreign Affairs, and finally, there is lots of people that help to carry on this conference. I won't mention all the names because it's too much and you have to catch your plan. But I really think that without Yelena, without Jeremy, without all the GPO staff, without Maria Elkin, there wasn't a conference. So therefore, on behalf of all of you, I would like to say thank you very much. Before we say goodbye and God bless all of us, please, no excuse. Everybody is coming here for the final picture. Thank you very much from Jerusalem. Come here.